of economics.
Sorry.
That's all right. We got that. And that means that anything that falls outside of a market contract is called an externality in economics. And that means when we're talking about the destruction of the living world, the unraveling of the web of life, the destruction of climate stability, economists will say, yes, yes, we call that an environmental externality. To me, that is reason alone to move beyond this framing. We will never protect the living world if we call its destruction an externality. Secondly, the self-portrait. Who does economics tell us we are? A character called Rational Economic Man. He would be drawn like this in the textbooks if they actually drew him. He's a man. He's got no dependents. He's standing alone. He's got money in his hand. That's how he interacts with the world, through the market. He's got ego in his heart. He's got a calculator in his head. And he's got nature at his feet. And the more that we're told that he is like us, we actually become like him. We need to move beyond this portrayal if we are going to thrive as 8 billion people in this world. And then the goal, which is so deeply ingrained in economics, they never actually draw the picture, but they should, because it would look like this. It's a goal of endless growth, measured in GDP or national income. And no matter how rich a country already is, like yours or mine, our politicians and our economists tell us that the solution to our problems lies in yet more growth. And there's something insane about that. I deeply believe that these concepts of economic progress have led us into the crises that we face today, whether it's financial meltdown or the era of climate and ecological breakdown, whether it's the protest crackdown against those who actually stand in defense of the living world, whether it's the COVID lockdown we lived through, or indeed the war over gas and oil, the economic cost of living crises that many people face. These are crises that emerge from systems that seek to endlessly expand. And that endless expansion comes back like a boomerang and hits us with crisis. So we need to move beyond seeking endless expansion as if there was always more available. We need a new vision of what thriving and a prosperous future could look like. So one compass for that vision is the donut. And you can think of it as a compass for prosperity. If humanity's use of Earth's resources radiates out from the center of that picture, then the hole in the middle of the donut is where people are falling short. That's where we want to leave nobody, because that's where people don't have the resources they need for food and water, for health and education, for housing and mobility, for political voice and gender equity. And these I drew from the Sustainable Development Goals. The power of that is that all the governments in the world have already agreed that every person in the world has a right not to be left in the hole. So leave no one in the hole, get everyone over the social foundation into that green circle. But, and this is a very big but, as we seek to meet our needs and our wants, we use Earth's resources, we transform land and forests into fields for food, we turn forests into timber to build houses, we mine, we produce carbon emissions, we extract water, we transform Earth. And as we use her resources and her systems and cycles, we risk putting them under so much pressure that we go over the ecological ceiling. And that is made up of the 9 planetary boundaries recognized by Earth system scientists for only 14 years, very recent science, saying we must protect these life support systems that make life work on this planet. So in the simplest of terms, the goal is to meet the needs of all people within the means of the living planet. The shape of progress is not endless growth, it's thriving in balance. And it's just like a heartbeat. Can we take what we know in our own bodies of our own health and beating heart? Can we take the knowledge of balance in our bodies from the human body to the planetary body and reinvent our economy to thrive? If balance and thriving is the goal, we are very far from that right now. All the red in this picture shows us globally, billions of people are left falling short on the essentials of life. All that red going into the center of the circle is the extent to which people can't meet their basic needs. We want to get rid of all the red and leave nobody in that deprivation. But at the same time as that, we have to recognize we've already overshot 6 planetary boundaries and must come back within them at the same time. Now, that's a very different dynamic than last century. And the headlines that we see in the newspapers tell us this every day. The headlines telling us of extreme pressure on the planet, and already we're seeing breakdown. We have to stay alert and alive as we turn the pages of the newspaper or scroll through the news feed. Another flood, another hurricane, another wildfire. Where is it this time? And to me, I really think one of the challenges for us is how do we stay alert and not become indifferent or overwhelmed by the patterns that are arising around us, but instead we respond to them. We have to recognize that last century's economic theories won't turn this story around. Last century's government policies, last century's business models, last century's lifestyles, none of them were designed to turn this story around. We need to reinvent with new theory, new policy, new business designs, new lifestyles. And let's recognize that this pressure on the planet immediately transforms into pressure in people's lives, breakdown of the systems on which we depend. It's been deeply familiar crises to people living across what we call the global south. Many of the lowest income countries in the world have long experienced these multiple crises. They are now beginning to touch us in countries, or the richest countries in the world, in the global north. So that makes us too more alert and aware to them, but they've always been there. They're just now more global. I really believe our children and their children will ask us, you saw these headlines, you saw these statistics. My parents and my grandparents' generation, what did you do once that you knew? How did you change the way you eat and the way you travel? How did you change the way you work and shop and you invest and divest and protest and volunteer? What did you do differently to turn this story around? And I think that's why all of us are in this room together on a Saturday morning. Everybody's here because we want to help turn this story around. How can we turn it around? Well, this is a global picture I'm showing you, right? And so we want to bring it a little closer to home. So here's national donuts that our colleague Andrew and some other researchers at Leeds University made, downscaling the donut for 150 countries. Here's just 4. You can see Malawi on around $1,500 per year. Massive human shortfall, all the red in the middle of that circle, not overshooting their share of ecological pressure at all. China, a double whammy of human shortfall and ecological overshoot. Norway, you are one of the few countries in the world that when compared internationally, the center of your circle is blue. That does not mean there are no problems for people in Norway. Of course there are. But when you're compared on international statistics, you are doing better than most to meet the basic needs of most people. But oh, look at that ecological overshoot. I have to say, when I fitted Norway into this picture, I actually had to move China and Malawi and America to make space for that red overshoot. And on over $80,000 per person per year. Now, the US doesn't even have that much per person, but look at their ecological overshoot, and they have it with inequality too. So every country here has a real transformation to make. There's nobody anywhere close to saying we're there, we've done it. Now, let me show you 50 countries together. The place where every single country wants to be here is in that top left-hand corner where there's a green donut. So we want to meet the needs of all people, come up to meet people's needs, but come back within the means of the living planet. So you can see the country that's closest is Costa Rica, nearly meeting people's needs, almost within the means of the living planet. But there's a huge scatter. And here's Norway, actually one of the highest impact of European countries. And then there's United States, Australia, and Canada way out. So the first thing we can notice here is there's not a single country in this picture that should be calling itself a developed nation. There's absolutely nothing developed or advanced about overshooting planetary boundaries. We are destroying the life support systems of the Earth, and we are undermining the very basic needs of many people who are impacted by that breakdown, including on our own countries and regions. We also have to recognize that all these countries are interconnected through histories of colonialism, through military and corporate power today, through trade and finance rules that are locked in favor of the global north, through resource extraction, and through the present and future impacts of climate change. So we need transformation within countries and between. Now, the history of economic growth has taken us on this trajectory. When countries have around $1,500 per person, like Malawi, it makes a world of difference when they double that to 3,000 and again to 6,000. Kids can survive. Families are well fed. Kids go to school. You can actually get basic health care. You might have a job. Women begin to have income and voice and can control the size of their families and their own choice. This is an empowering phase of increasing incomes. But most countries, instead of heading straight into the donut from there, have just headed straight past it and gone into resource use and consumption that actually overshoots planetary boundaries. So this is the 20th century story that's taken us straight past the donut. This is the story we need to turn around and take in a completely different direction. So can the future of planetary prosperity instead, let's recluster these countries into three groups. First, the lower income countries like Bangladesh, Malawi, Tanzania, Nepal. Can these countries become the rise nations that meet the needs of all of their people, but do so while coming within planetary boundaries, not overshooting like everyone before them has done? How will they do that? It's never been done before. Can middle-income countries like Mexico, Iran, Turkey, Russia, China, can they both meet people's needs for the first time and come back within planetary boundaries at the same time? That's not been done before. And can the high-income nations, yours, mine, all high-income nations, all of Europe, Japan, New Zealand, Canada too, reduce our impact, that red overshoot that's so visible on the screen? Can we reduce that? Come back within planetary boundaries, and finally meet the needs of everybody, because we definitely have the resources to do that. And then we need a rebalancing between these nations, rebalancing that holds many things: reparations for injustices, redistribution of wealth, release from unjust debt, redesign of the international financial institutions, and a rebalance of voice in power and governance. So there's massive transformation needed within and between every nation if we as a world are to come into the donut. We also need to just move away from thinking that growth is what's going to get us there. And I think we need to put two very different dynamics in place of where we had growth. We need to become regenerative and distributive by design. Let me show you. We have inherited linear degenerative economic systems where we take Earth's materials, make them into stuff we want, use it for a while, and then we throw it away. And that take, make, use, lose pushes us over planetary boundaries. We need to reuse and repurpose and share and recycle everything that we have. So we need to turn the linear degenerative into circular, cyclical, regenerative economy, so that we work with and within the cycles of the living world, separating biological materials and technical materials so they can each either decompose or be reused and recomposed and shared and repaired and restored again and again and again. Now, what we're not talking about is going from degenerative just to sustainable. Sustainable has too often come to mean just sustaining things where they are. No more deforestation, no further degradation, no more additional harm. We need to go beyond that, because we have so degraded and run down the living world that we must go through a great era of restoration and create a regenerative economy that brings back life at the center. We need to go beyond not just degrading and throwing away our waste in the neighborhoods of the world's poorest people to, oh, well, let's recycle everything. We never have the energy and the chemical pollution that actually is involved in recycling everything. We need to go upstream and make sure that things can be disassembled and repaired. Just replace the part that needs it, and shared and reused, so that we are minimizing that energetic use in the first place. So from degenerative to regenerative. And I invite you to think of all the ways that you can see this already happening where you live, and all the ways it's not already happening where you live. But also, we've inherited economies that tend to capture value and opportunity in the hands of a few, maybe within a nation, or maybe between nations, as we just saw. The rise of the global 1%, the number of billionaires in the world, has doubled over the last decade, from 1,000 billionaires to 2,000 billionaires. There's absolutely no chance of humanity living in the donut with such extremes of inequality. A few people massively over-consuming and millions left short. We need to create economies that are distributive by design, that share value and opportunity with everybody who co-creates it. And that turns out to be the whole of society. So again, we don't want to go from a divisive society to an inclusive one. I think of this as if divisive is just a heavy car traffic jam, an inclusive one is one that has the bus in the traffic jam. We've all been on the bus in the traffic jam. I don't want to be on a bus in a traffic jam. I want a distributive system that means the people who went on the bus, they paid the least, it's the quickest, the best, the smartest way of traveling. We get our own dedicated bus lanes. That is a much more distributive design, making opportunity for all. But likewise, let's not just create a world that moves away from poverty wages to a living wage. Congratulations, you're now paid a wage you can actually live on. That's a very minimal hope for the future. Can we be distributive? You're paid a living wage and have a profit share from the work that you can contribute to. So these kinds of design, distributive by design in many, many ways. I invite you to think, how is your society and community already distributive by design? And how is it not yet distributive by design? So let me bring this to place. Ever since the donut was first published in 2012, 11 years ago, people from places, from cities or towns or districts said, well, could we do this here? We don't have to wait for the whole world. Could we be front runners? Could we aim to bring our place into the donut? So I'm going to show you the framework that we've introduced and invited people to use around the world. And the first thing we need to do is unroll the donut. We need to make some space between that social foundation and ecological ceiling. And you can see in there's a little question that we want to ask. It's actually not a little question at all. It's a very big question. Here it is. How can our place, our town, city, neighborhood, become a home to thriving people in a thriving place while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? That's a really big question, intentionally, because it invites us to think of everything that matters. So let's break it down into what we call the 4 lenses of a portrait of place. So we've got on the one side local aspirations, and that will be what it feels like to live here. But we also have our global responsibilities, because we know that the way we live wherever we are is connected to and dependent on and impacts upon people and planet worldwide. And we have to take responsibility for that. So let's start with our local aspirations. How can all of the people of our place thrive? What would it mean for everybody where you are to have good food and good housing, affordable, clean mobility, good education and healthcare, community and culture, connection, respect and voice? What is the standard, the target for that where you live? And how are people still falling short? What would it mean for your place to be as generous as nearby nature? If we could, we would together walk into the nearby woods and forest where you are and just take marvel in nature's generosity. Everywhere on Earth, nature has figured out how to sequester carbon, how to store groundwater after a storm, how to cool the air on a hot day from the treetops to the forest floor, how to house biodiversity, how to harvest the sun's energy, how to make us feel at home, how to turn everything back into soil and be regenerative by design. Can we create places, the towns and cities next door to that wild nature? Can we create places that actually aim to be as generous as the wildland next door? What a radically wild but utterly natural aspiration. So these are the 2 local aspirations, and you would feel the quality of this. And I think many people think of Norway, Sweden, Denmark as countries that have this fantastic quality of life in a wealthy and healthy ecology. But we have to put that next to the global responsibilities too. How can we make sure that the way we live here is within planetary boundaries and respects the health of the whole planet? And as we saw, every high-income country in the world is overshooting, really raging red on this one. So this is where we must put in a lot of transformation to cut carbon emissions, to become a circular economy and reduce material through flow, to cut waste coming in and waste going out. How do we come back within planetary boundaries? And thinking of the global supply chains, that where all your food comes from, clothes, the materials we're using, the phones we're using, all imported and impacting supply chains around the world. Think of also the people who are impacted by that, who stitched the clothes you're wearing today, who picked and packed the food that we're eating, who assembled the phones and the laptops that we're all using. Were they paid a living wage? Who's impacted today by the climate breakdown that's happening now, that we know is impacted because of the carbon emissions involved in our own lives? And what responsibility do we have towards them? And when humanity is on the move, and this is going to be not just a decade, but a century of humanity on the move, people seeking places where they can live, how will they be welcomed? What will be the official policy of welcome? What will be the cultural policy of welcome? How do we impact on people worldwide? So these are just some of the ways, and we would invite you to dive in and say, what would this mean here? How do we need to transform here? Let me just show you that places and cities and towns and communities around the world are already engaging with these ideas in so many ways. These shown here are just the local governments that have started working with these tools. But actually community groups have done amazing work initiating and sparking a rethinking of the future. The city of Amsterdam was the first place to engage with the donut and say, we want to do that here, put it at the heart of our circularity policy. They made a Dutch orange donut. They said, we want to be a thriving, inclusive, regenerative city for all residents while living within planetary boundaries. And then they started putting it into practice with housing projects, with fair clothing and textile industry, and with farmers and connecting farmers to families in the city. And then the Amsterdam Doughnut Coalition came together and said, we're going to create a social movement behind this and really work with the city and challenge the city to make this happen. So they were pioneers that many others have now followed, but also adapted and added their own special sauce and spice. Barcelona is another example of a city that said, we're going to take those four lenses, unroll the donut. We're going to actually gather our targets and our data and monitor ourselves over time. So you can see they really went for a data-driven monitoring of progress over time. Many community organizations around the world have said, we're going to do this ourselves. And we may not have all of the data that the city has, but we can bring our sense and our experience and our hopes and visions and aspirations and challenges. We can collect those together and make a people's portrait of place. In Bad Nauheim in Germany, they created a citizens' assembly of 100 randomly chosen people to come up with their vision of what it would mean for Bad Nauheim to be thriving in the donut, and to think about how to examine possible projects they could do there. Will they bring us into this space or push us out of it? And in Birmingham, just an hour from where I'm living now, an amazing community organization have really brought this to life at the level of the neighborhood, street to street, making the economic conversation exciting, available, political as in the politics of life, bringing it into people's lives and getting everybody involved in what it would mean to transform their own neighborhood. If you're interested in some of these ideas, we've got some of them captured in our report, Cities and Regions, Let's Get Started, just examples around the world. But you've got Rob in the room who's doing incredible work with community organizations around the world too, who I'm sure could show you many more inspirations if you wanted to get started where you are. So let me finish here. We began, it seems a long time ago now, 20 minutes ago, with the 20th century economics, supply and demand, price, rational economic man seeking profit for himself, and endless growth. These concepts are so outdated. They damage our minds, they damage our communities, they damage our government policies, and they definitely damage the living world. We need to start a 21st century economics where we begin with a goal. And the goal is to meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. We recognize that we are social, adaptable, interconnected humans. We are the most social of all mammals and have to tap into that quality. And we're going to do some more of that in a minute. And instead of pursuing growth, we should be seeking to create economies that are regenerative, that belong within the regenerative capacities of the living world, and that are distributive of value and opportunity, because that is the only way that we can all together move into the donut. I'm going to stop here and I think open up if there are any questions anybody would like to ask at this point before we dive into exploring nurturing human nature. Thank you very much.
When the breaststroke is going and then down again. Well, we're just on the first stroke into the ideas. We're just going to take a breather and to decompress and have a moment to ask questions before we go down again. So we're going to go down deeper into one of the concepts in a moment. But first, maybe we can gather a few questions that are coming up with what Kate has said. And Thomas has a microphone if you'll be able to.
I can ask the question for Kate here. So
Okay.
yeah, and for everyone, so she can hear it. And so if you have questions, then yeah, that's better. That's better.
Great. So we have one here, then we'll. Currently any hope of any countries joining this initiative?
Are there any hope?
I'm actually not able to hear you asking the question, Thomas.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Are there currently any hope of any nations or countries joining this initiative?
Oh, that's a great question. Thank you. So this work, so at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we just respond to who comes to us. We found that's a highly compelling way to make these ideas spread. We work with the governments that approach us and say, we think we want to do this here. And it began with cities, as I showed. It began with Amsterdam. Now, peers inspire peers. So a mayor will inspire other mayors. When Amsterdam did it, almost 6 weeks later, Copenhagen voted. Copenhagen City Council said, we want to explore this. And then Brussels, and then Barcelona, and then Glasgow. So cities inspired cities. And that's why it took off, I think, at the level of cities and now more districts and towns. But some national governments are starting to see that what's going on. The European Commission, there's a lot of people in the European Commission who are seeing some of Europe's most prominent cities engaging with this. What is going on? So there's been interest inside the Commission. We've done meetings, sort of quiet webinars behind the scenes with the Treasury of New Zealand or the data unit at number 10 Downing Street in the UK, with the minister in Canada. We're beginning to be invited to speak to national policymakers, national civil servants. We have done a really wonderful training program and a series of exchange with the government of Bhutan, who approached us and said, we have our concept in Bhutan of gross national happiness. And when we look at the donut and Doughnut Economics, it is the most connected concept we see coming out of Western thinking with gross national happiness. We want to look at how we can put these ideas together. But I really appreciate your question, because at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, we think we're going to get more engagement and connection with national level governments. And so we're at the moment hiring a government and policy lead so that we have someone in our team dedicated to expanding that work. Because of course, there are things you can do at the level of a city or a town, but there's a lot you can't because of national policy making. So we really want to start working with countries that want to engage there.
Possible job opportunity there for anyone.
I'm interested in the politics side in many ways, like Amsterdam is much in front of Norway in terms of circularity. We're on the bottom of Norway, the Netherlands, way far ahead of us. Next 20 years to come. But some of the questions I have is this tendency of grabbing towards these concepts that may sound very good for their purpose, like the circularity aspect, and asking you whether how you see this. I wouldn't call it co-opting it, but the political agency and how we can how true change can come out of the donut concept, so it's not going further towards what we don't need. Yeah.
Wow. That was a long question, Kate. You didn't hear it, no? No.
I could hear something about Amsterdam circularity and agency, but fill me in.
There's she's leaning towards this. She's a small social entrepreneur in Oslo. She's wondering about circularity and how also maybe the like how that concept maybe has been co-opted, and it looks good on maybe businesses and organizations like portfolio or outside, and how you can avoid sort of the donut being co-opted as well. I think that's the essence, and how the politics behind it. Yeah.
Okay, that's a great question. I would say that just about any concept can be co-opted if people want to co-opt it. Unless you say you cannot use my word, you can't use it in my name, but people can say I'm circular, I'm regenerative. I mean, regenerative can be co-opted, distributive, sustainable, development, inclusive, all these words can be co-opted. It's true. So we can't control that. I just need to acknowledge that. We need to have metrics that tell us, are we coming back within planetary boundaries or not? Are we meeting the needs of all people or not? How do we, at the level of a city, how do we have a carbon budget? Do we have a nitrogen budget? What is the quality of the water? So there are clear metrics that we can use to assess over time whether a place is coming back in or not. When it comes to companies are much more likely to claim for themselves, oh yes, we're doing a circular. And of course, there's a spectrum of things you can do to claim to be circular or not. We're using refillable plastic bottles is a very small step. A fully circular design would be a much deeper transformation. And when we at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, when we work with companies, since you were saying you're an entrepreneur, we talk about not the design of your products. We want to talk about the deep design of your company. 5 design traits. What is your purpose? What are the networks of relationship you create and let go of? How are you governed? How is your company owned? And how is it financed? And these 5 deep design traits will ultimately determine whether or not you can become truly towards regenerative and distributive, or whether you're stuck being divisive and degenerative and will use words like these for greenwashing. The last thing I'll say is, of course, it's impossible. I was showing, can individual cities or towns move into the donut? But everything in life is so interconnected. Nobody can get there alone without the rest of us. So I don't think there is any company that can say we are a truly circular, regenerative company, or we are a completely circular, regenerative city. It's not possible because we're so connected with everybody else. You are inevitably drawn into old systems, held back by those systems. So we need to move there together. It's about moving forward, and who are going to be the front runners that demonstrate possibility. So Amsterdam adopting a circular strategy, there's all sorts of pressures from them, from other cities, from the national government, and from within their own government. So it's continually political and I'm going to say this with a small political p. I don't mean party politics. I mean the politics of trying to make change, what we can make happen, what we can't make happen. We talk with cities and places about the powers to act. What do you actually have the power to change alone? If you can stop it, stop it. If you can start doing it, start doing it. And if you can only change it when you work with others, You're going to have to work with others. So we have to enable ideas to spread, but also try to guard them against greenwash. And it's a very, very delicate balance. And we're learning as we go how we can defend that or not. So that it's a complex answer to a complex question.
The idea that I was talking about is have resources available on the deal website. They are tools that you can take and use in your own country. Anyone have any questions about that, you can signpost them in another session, or you can type. So we have one question here, one question there, and then we'll go.
Thank you.
Ja, hvis du vil snakke, komme hit, så kan du... We will get them straight here, so we don't need this. Yeah.
Or you could,
Yeah, it's a short...
So I still speaking to this one?
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, okay, yeah. And
Okay.
So
Like that. Hello. What
Hi.
is my name is Bente and I'm involved in the Green Party in Norway. What a hugely inspiring talk you gave us. Hugely inspiring, but also somehow not depressing. Don't misunderstand me, but we live in a country which is enormously rich. And we are apparently the country in Europe where we are on top as climate deniers. We are oil rich, and people don't particularly like having their privileges taken away from them. We've just had municipal and county elections, and a picture in my head is your public transport picture with 2 buses. Yes, that's what the Green Party has been trying to do in Oslo. But the Progress Party has beat us in this election. They want to take away all the bicycle lanes. Let's have more cars. What is your advice to us? As it's not a small question, but give us some ideas on tools. You've given us a lot. I need more. Thank you.
Thank you, Bente. Are you telling me that people in Oslo are actually voting for a party that says we're going to remove the bicycle lanes and instead replace them with cars, and that they are?
yeah, we just had a local election, and a lot of the conservatives on the right have gained power in many big cities and also Oslo. So it's a bad trend. But yeah, back to the question. A very long question, but yeah.
No, great question. Well, I'm really shocked by that, but what I'm seeing, and I'm going to bring it back to my own neighborhood, where, for example, they're trying to introduce low traffic neighborhoods by stopping cars cutting through, increasing the number of bicycles. And actually, no, I'm going to bring it back to the UK, right? So Rishi Sunak, our prime minister, just 2-3 days ago said we're going to be much more grown up about climate change, and we're going to delay banning fossil fuel cars. Now, the language that he's using, this is real capture and co-option of language. He's saying this is the pragmatic thing to do. This is real long-term thinking. There's something happening in politics where people use a highly inclusive language or a very desirable language to introduce policies that actually are deeply undermining human health, human life, and planetary health and life. So I think the onus is on those of us advocating this transformation to really find powerful language to reframe back from that. I don't know enough about your specific situation, but I do know, and I'm going to speak to what you said, but Norway is an oil-rich country, and in the UK, we are fighting to stop Norwegian investments in Rosebank, in UK opening up drilling. So we really want Norway to stop using its oil to impose and invest in other parts of the world, but keep opening oil fields here in the UK. So yes, I think you've got a really specific reflection as a nation. And I'm not saying, obviously, I'm not saying this to those in the room. You're in the room, you're already in this room. But as a nation, to recognize that the wealth, the incredible wealth of the country has come from oil and can no longer be used in that way to generate that wealth, because it's a fuel of the past, and it's destroying the future. So it's a deep self-reflection for Norway. But I need to read more about what you just said about the party gaining power and getting rid of bike lanes. That's a very, it's a pushback, isn't it? It's a pushback against the progress that has been made towards a much more ecological and health-based life. And we, promoting that, have to sharpen up in our debate to prevent the pushback from winning. So I'm seeing it here in the UK, you're seeing it there in Norway, and it's happening internationally. So I don't have a quick answer on that, but it's a really, really important one for us all to reflect on.
We have a short question.
Yeah, short. Yeah. Never. Yeah.
Because as far as I know, it doesn't use the word degrowth.
Question is, how can degrowth and Doughnut Economics work together? She is saying that you don't use the degrowth word explicitly. So how? Yeah.
Great, thank you. Great question. So when I listen to leading degrowth scholars, such as Jason Hickel or Yorgos Kallis, when they describe what they mean by degrowth, they say we need to reduce our material consumption and production so that we come back within planetary boundaries. And we need to do that in a just way. To me, that is exactly describing coming back into the donut. So when I showed that scatter plot and the high income countries, it said reduce. You could write right there, degrow. That's the same meaning. The reason why I don't use the word degrowth is because I've found that in public conversation, if you go on the radio, the mainstream radio, or talking with people who've never heard this word before, they immediately think, quite understandably, they immediately think that what you want to do is make GDP go down. I've never heard a degrowth scholar who says, my goal is to make GDP go down. But when you try and talk about it in a wider community, that's what people understand. So my experience is that immediately we're in a place of misunderstanding. And also there's a very strong resistance to it. And any politician, since we've had 100 years of growth, is normal, is good, is obvious, to suddenly go degrowth for a politician is like upside down. It's, to my mind, it's too big a leap. They're not going to suddenly talk like that. And also they realize the public may completely misunderstand what they mean. By the way, if I'm in debate with people who want to critique my position, the opposition will say, oh, you're for degrowth. They throw degrowth into the debate intentionally to confuse it, to make me have to try and explain it. So I find I've got a real resistance to that word because I think it's getting in the way of policies that make a lot of sense. And that's why I say we need to be regenerative and we need to be distributive by design. And we need to end our structural dependency on endless growth. And when I show that and show those diagrams and show the graphs, people just understand it and go along with it. Doesn't mean that everybody completely agrees, but everybody understands what I'm explaining. So that's why I personally don't use the word degrowth. I know there's a huge community, particularly of young scholars, who are really mobilized around it. That's great. If it works for them, great. But I would say, don't think that you can just take that language that works within that community and say it on the radio, in the news to the world, and think everybody's going to be understanding it or excited by it. What I think is happening is we're getting the opposite reaction, and it's slowing down the progress of these kinds of transformations that we need. That's my personal take on it.
One last question. Unfortunately, there are limits. Many things happen with this question, so we can make sure of a answer maybe after as well. But yes, this last question is there.
Yes. Yes. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So yeah. Oh, yeah. And also, also from the Green Party, I'm like a climate activist. And the last week or so, I've actually been chatting with an oil executive trying to convince him to stop oil exploration. And I did it just now in this morning, but he claims that like I would like by doing these climate measures and like stopping oil exploration, for example, that I would just sacrifice the kind of middle of the donuts for people, and just and that like yeah, that is no alternative to like this business as usual kind of like we should not thinking, I guess. But anyway, like it's been really hard to convince him to agree with me, of course. And also like even if I reference science on it, but anyway, well, like what should my answer be to his like straw man kind of like we're just making it worse for the poor by doing yeah, being more sustainable kind of logic.
Thanks. You were speaking to him this morning. That was a very early meeting on a Saturday you had with an oil executive. I'm impressed. I'm going to say, I think you're speaking to him, if you're speaking to him as, not as your neighbor or your friend or your somebody you met in a community group, but as an oil executive, he's speaking as a company. And the response he gives is completely understandable. As a company, he is there to defend the profits of the company. I'm coming back to the deep design of the company makes him speak like that. The deep design of the company, its purpose is to maximize returns to shareholders or to the state. It depends whether it's a public or private company. The networks of it, it's completely embedded in the oil industry, surrounded by people who justify to each other that this industry is needed and that the world actually depends upon us. It's governed in a way that is driving decisions based on future revenue and investment and monetary decisions, not on environmental decisions. And that money is coming from the state or the shareholders, and it's expectation of return, and they're locked in to a business model that worked in the past, so they believe it's going to keep working in the future. I'm going to bet that if you could take that oil executive, if that oil executive has two ways. One, if they have children, I don't know how old their children are. I bet on a family holiday and their child tugs them on the sleeve and says, Dad, what is it you're actually doing at work? And I am appalled by the impact that you're having in the world. And I want you to explain to me why you do this job. I bet that oil executive would reflect in a different way and speak from a different place, because now they're on holiday with their family and in their family values. I also am going to guess that this oil executive, let's say they were 50 years old, when that person is 80 years old, when the world has transformed, what will they say? And maybe they'll say to you, thank you for pushing us, because actually at the time, I know I told you to go away and grow up, but actually it was the pressure we needed. And we needed to change inside the company. And of course, in the end, we changed. But thank you for putting that pressure on us. It actually helped us get the conversation into the boardroom. So that's what I would say. I've been in that situation myself with people from companies who a decade later have said, thank you for putting pressure on us. At the time, they told us to go away and stop being ridiculous. But you're speaking to somebody who's embedded in a corporation, and we need to tap into their values, and we need to change the design of those corporations. And we need all the pressure on them that we can, because the idea that we need them to protect human rights and the essentials of life, no. Oil at this point, we know too much. It is undermining the life support systems of our planet. It's undermining the future of everybody's foundations. On that, I stop.
Thank you for those brilliant questions. Then you can pick them up and have a break at 11 a.m. And ask each other, you can sometimes me if they're specifically about the ideas or the tools. But what we're going to do now is that we've taking a breath, we're going to go back in, and Kate is going to introduce us to one of the ideas in the book. It's explored in chapter 3 of Doughnut Economics, and it's about how we've been told stories about our nature as humanity that we might need to rethink. The chapter is called Nurture Human Nature, and human nature isn't just one thing or another thing. We are so many things, which includes playful. And in this next section, we're going to invite play into the room. So Kate is going to tee us up by sharing some of these ideas, and then I'm going to introduce again. So first, over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, so we're going to dive into one of the 7 ways to think like a 21st century economist in Doughnut Economics. The donut is just the goal, but what matters is how we change the way we think. So let's just dive into this. So mainstream economics, as you know, told us that we are rational economic man, standing alone, money in your hand, ego in your heart, calculator in your head, nature at his feet. He hates work. He loves luxury, and he knows the price of everything. Now, the really fascinating fact about this model is that the more that students are taught about this model, the more they say they value self-interest over altruism, the more they value competition over collaboration. The more that we look at this model, we actually become like him. So who we tell ourselves we are shapes who we become. Economic students start mimicking rational economic man. I find that devastating, but also thrilling, that it means that if we tell ourselves different stories based on actually who we really are, not on a weird model, we can rewire and nurture the best of human nature. So what if we meet ourselves all over again? We leave aside the model of rational economic man, and we want to explore through games and through theories who we actually can be. And the way we're going to do it is look at these 5 traits that I've just pulled out in the book, right? So we're leaving behind rational economic man and moving towards being social adaptable humans. So 5 traits. Mainstream economics told us we're self-interested, me, right? Actually, we are pro-social beings. We are the most social of all mammals. We care a lot about others and what others think of us. We've got to tap into that. Mainstream economics treats humans as isolated individuals operating alone. In fact, we're deeply interdependent. That's what fashion is. That's what gossip is. That's what trends are. We influence each other. We're not actually deeply rational. Our brains don't work that fast or that way. We're heuristic, which means we follow the rule of thumb. We generally go in this direction or that direction. So we follow rules that mean we can respond in real time. We don't have calculators in our head. And so we've got to tap into our heuristic characteristics. We don't have fixed preferences. We don't have, exact ways we're facing the world. We actually have very fluid values that can be triggered on or off. If I invited you to fill in a survey as a consumer, so research shows that you would fill it in very differently than if I invite you to fill in a survey as a citizen. If I call you as consumer or I call you as citizen, it's triggered different values in yourself and you will respond to the same survey differently. And lastly, we've been told that we're dominant over the living world. Nature is our resource, like a Lego block for us to play with. In fact, we are, of course, deeply dependent upon and interwebbed in the web of life. So 5 deep design traits that we need to transform away from the models we've been taught towards better understanding who real science tells us we actually are. And today we're just going to focus and have a game and think about the first one, moving from being self-interested to pro-social. So let's start with chickens. There are some wonderful lessons we can learn from super chickens. When anyone gets a flock of chickens together, and a researcher called William Muir was studying chickens, and he realized that there were always some chickens that were just more powerful than the rest. I think you can see which one is the super chicken here. jumping straight in the pot of food. They were bigger than others, and they would lay more eggs than other chickens. So he had a flock of chickens, and the super chickens, the red one at the top, was laying many more eggs than all of the other chickens in the flock. So he thought, wow, you could make a flock of super chickens, then you'd really have a powerful egg laying machine there. So what Mio did was separate the chickens into two groups. He took away all the super chickens and put them together. And then he put all the ordinary chickens in another group. And he raised them together over 6 generations. He just kept hatching and hatching and seeing what happened. At first, of course, we have the super chickens laying more eggs than the others because that's what they did. But over 6 generations, the results were extraordinary. The ordinary flock actually lay a lot of eggs, and the super chickens lay very few eggs because mostly they had killed each other. They had literally pecked each other to death. And this is a powerful way of moving into a fundamental insight about humans. So David Sloan Wilson and E.O. Wilson worked together to write a groundbreaking paper about what they call multi-level selection. But think about it as about how humans behave in groups and between groups. And they said, selfishness beats altruism within groups. We've all been in one of those groups, right? There's one person who pushes to the front of the queue, or they always put their hand up and answer all the questions and don't listen to anybody else, or they take all the credit for the work that was done, or they take the last slice of cake or the first slice of cake. So they win, they get more, and they get more recognition. And we think, oh, they're a super chicken. They're really the star performer of the group. But here's the news. My screen stopped clicking. Here we are. Here's the news. Altruistic groups beat selfish groups. So when you have a group of only made up of people who are altruistic and collaborative, they are more successful. They outcompete groups that have some super chickens in them or are made up only of those super chickens, because they're so busy jostling for position, they're not collaborating. So altruistic groups beat selfish groups. And as they said, everything else is commentary, meaning this is all you need to know. Selfishness wins within a group. Collaboration wins between groups. Now, we're going to play a game so that you can explore and experience what it feels like to have to work with competitive or collaborative people. So in a minute, you're going to be handed one playing card. Don't look at the cards, just take whatever you're given, right? Don't try and choose one, just take whatever you're given. If your card is red, you're a super chicken, right? You're competitive. You're just trying to win. If your card is black, you are a collaborative chicken and you're fair for the group. Now you're going to get into pairs 5 times. You're going to get into pairs. And when you get in pairs, you're going to get points. Let's imagine you're collecting eggs, okay? You're going to get points. If a red card and a black card meet, the red card gets 3 points and the black card gets no points. If 2 black cards meet, you each get 2 points. If 2 red cards meet, you each get 1 point. So if you're red, you can look and think, okay, I can see what I want to do. I can see who I want to be pairing with to get the most points. And if you're black, you can see who you want to be pairing with to get the most points. So what we're going to do when you've all got a card, you're going to get up from your chairs and we're imagining now you're in a giant chicken coop, okay? Your chicken's in a giant coop and you're going to get together in 5 pairs. So 5 times you're going to make a pairing. You're going to walk up to somebody. And when you get in a pair, then you'll show each other your cards. And when you see your cards, well, then you record what your score was. So and you're going to add your score to your previous score. So you've got to keep in your head your score. Then you can each decide, do I want to stay in this pair or do I want to change? If you want to stay with that person, you can stay with them for the next round or the next round. If you want to change, you can change. Nobody can make you stay. You can change, okay? And we're going to do this quickly. So you're going to make 5 pairings. You're going to walk up to somebody. You're going to show each other your cards. You're going to figure out how many points you each got. add that to your points, decide if you want to stay or change, and then you make your next pairing. And you're going to do 5 pairings. And when you have done 5, sit back down with your eggs, maybe on your eggs, but sit back down, all right? Imagining you're sitting on your eggs, however many you've collected. I'm going to hand over to Rob to run the game in the room at this point, but I hope that makes sense.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much, Kate. Okay, hang on. Wait. Before we get going, just to run through that one more time. My Norwegian isn't great. I've been here 2 days, but I will give it a go. So, you should by now have been given a card. If you have not been given a card, everyone has a card. So at this stage, hopefully you've had a look at your card, because you're not showing that because we haven't started the game. So on your card, you'll see it is either a red card or a black card. Usually handed out by very young-looking grandparents trying action, thank you to the volunteers. And whilst they're wearing red hats, I don't think that means they have to be. So we're going to stand up in a moment, and when we do that, we find a pairing. So we find someone, and then we show each other our card. If our card combination is this, then you get the corresponding number of points, or you could call them eggs. If your cards are this combination, you get this corresponding number. And if your cards are this combination, you get these number of points. So, if I was a red card, and I met another red card, I would get 1 point. They would get 1 point. If I'm a red card, and I meet another black card, obviously I'm still a red card. So I'm the red card for the whole game. But when I meet a black card, I get 3, which is great for me, not so good for them. So then you keep making pairs. You make 5 pairs in total, and then you sit down on the number of eggs you've collected, or the number of points you've got, depending on how much of a chicken you want to channel in this game. So we won't indicate when you need to make a new pairing. You just in your own time go and make it out from one another. And once you make 5 pairs, you sit back down and start sort of eating, warming up your eggs. And so then we'll see once the game is finished, because everyone will be sitting back down again. We have some people with hands in the air. Yes, you first. Beautiful. Great question. Will allow you to come up with your own strategy. So you may choose to go with the same person together, or you may choose to not, because that wasn't very helpful. So go with whatever strategy you choose, and then we'll have a reflection about what happened. Any other questions? One here? Are we adding 5? Yes, you add the points, you keep a total of how many points over 5 rounds. Any other questions? Yes. Should do that. We will do side exchanges, if you like. Yeah. So you can't stay exactly with the same person straight away. You have to go to someone else, but you could come back to that other person. So yes, that's an important thing to say. So you can't just find someone and do 5 times with them. You have to move at least. You have to move away once, and you could come back. But there are other strategies to think about. Any other questions? Okay, so are we handling our chicken leg set? Yeah. One more question. So the only thing is that you can't just repeat the next go, but you could come back to something. I think this is the thing we'll discuss after. So I'll let you know today. Okay, so are we ready? On your feet, start clocking, and away you go. I forgot to do the phone. I can put it on now so you can hear the responses. I didn't see your message, but I said that they can go and come back. Which, let's see. Okay, can you hear me now? If you can hear the plane one infrared, so it has different colors moving around. We want to finish our last pairing to get those eggs. Okay. So before we find out what people did, let's find out how people did. Who got, unfortunately, who got no eggs at all? One person over. How does that feel? Got a microphone over for that person. Now, how's it feel to be the only person with no eggs? And nobody's quite fun. Oh, I beg your pardon. So we have two people without any eggs. Can I ask, whilst you keep the mic, can I ask what happened? I went around and first at and how did that? Yeah, and did you? Yeah, any thoughts about that sequence? Well, I think for me personally, in the political world, it seems to be more competitive. But yeah, thank you. And there's one other person over here who was with eggless by the end. How was that for you? Actually, I have to give up the tree because I didn't want to give bonus. Nobody wants to be there. I want to be there. So we gave up. That would be a strategy. So let's move towards, we had 5 rounds. Let's move towards maybe the middle round. Who ended up between 6 and that looks about just under half. So we asked a couple of people. What's the strategy you understood? Maybe the people just in front of you.
Well, I had black card, and then quickly identified 2 other people who also had them, and tried to alternate between those. Got 1 red card in the way, and that person not to help it again. I went back to my trusty, my friends, and repeated the stuff.
Yeah, great. So we just hear from one other person who got in that range.
I was actually this.
Nice talking to you. I more and the first one was covered, and I tried to tell you where she went, but I didn't learn anything more. And the rest I met very well, so I was 7 points. I wasn't that unhappy, but I was very unhappy with getting it. Ah, that one instance of the rest definitely quite the notion. Okay, so who got either 14 or and just straight face, just hand in the air. Look at your competitive game face. How did that I'm proud of it. I noticed that today, so I was asking very different people. But I feel proud that I did know something about it. Nice, just straight up. Did any person say more? Yeah, there's one person over. Yeah.
I actually felt kind of lonely because I had a red card in my own cards, and immediately I showed my card and I was left. So I was searching to see if I could meet the red one to see if I kind of scored well, but personally I didn't do well.
Thank you. And did anyone score any more? No, by the rules. Kate mentioned before that the experiment was done over 6 generations, and we did this over 5. So what would happen if we did it for 10 or 15? What would be the outcome? And what might happen? And might it be that the black cooperative ends might learn to group together and actually overall gain more integrity? What might happen then to the red cooperative, not the cooperative ends, the super chickens? Would they be left with each other? What would they do if they're left? So, the people is hypothetical questions to follow. But what we're going to do, we're going to hand back to Kate just to kind of say, well, yes, we've played this game, but it can also have quite big implications about how this plays out in our relationship. Lots of different scales. So back to you, Kate, and we're able to go to about 5 parts.
Great. So wonderful to see you all playing that game in the room. It raises the emotions and the strategies, and the question of if you're stepping into the group, who am I surrounded by? So how do group dynamics shape how we behave? You were given cards, so you had to be competitive or collaborative. But of course, inside each one of us, there's a competitive person and there's a collaborator, right? We all have the capacity to do both. And when we're stepping into a new group, in our minds, we're often asking, well, what are the dynamics of this group? How do you get things done here? Do I have to compete to even be seen, or do I collaborate? How do we know how to show up? And how, when we create groups, can we make sure that people show up as collaborators rather than bring their competitive side and turn into a super chicken? So can groups learn to be more collaborative, knowing that we all have these capacities inside us? And Elinor Ostrom said, yes, they can. Elinor Ostrom won the Nobel Prize in Economics, the first woman to win such a Nobel Prize. She was actually a political scientist. She studied how collaborative groups work together and what makes that work. And she's known for her theory of the commons. When people are creating a shared resource, like a group, what are the principles that make it work well? So here are her 8 core design principles. She says it's for managing a commons, but we can really think of it as the core principles that make people able to work well in groups and brings the best of each of us. We bring our good chicken when we're working in that group. So I invite you to think about each of these in any group. whether it's at work or in your family or in a community or in a voluntary group. How are these in play? First one, you need a strong group identity and understanding of purpose. So who's a member of this group and who's not? We need to be, who's in this group and what are we doing together? What's our shared goal? Second, a fair distribution of costs and benefits. If somebody is putting in way more work, they should get more credit or paid more or more recognition or more thanks. There should be a fair distribution of costs and benefits. There should be fair and inclusive decision-making set up so that everybody's needs and voice is heard. We need to monitor agreed upon behaviors. Listen, you said you'd clean up in the kitchen after you, but I see you've left tomato sauce all over the counter, right? We need to monitor each other, sometimes gently in our families or not gently. Sometimes it's an official rule coming in. You went and took timber out of the forest outside of the agreed months that we can do that. You will be excluded from this group if you keep doing that, right? So we monitor our behaviors. We have to stick to the rules that we have agreed together. There are graduated sanctions for misbehaviors. The first time you might be given a little nudge and a telling off, or you might ultimately be excluded from the group if you keep breaking the rules. There's fair and fast conflict resolution. So disputes happen. We need to resolve them in a way that everybody's voice is heard. This group needs to have the authority to govern itself. And that's very connected to the last one. It needs appropriate relationships with other groups. Other groups need to recognize that we are governing ourselves, not interfere with us and not impose upon us. That's how we can create our rules. So these are Ostrom's 8 core design principles from what enables groups to work well together and what brings out the healthy chicken, not the super chicken in each of us. And we can really think about this at multiple levels. Whether when you're in a group, is our group going to be collaborative or is it going to descend into super chickens? Football teams, Barcelona versus Real Madrid. Real Madrid had a policy around 2000. It was called the Galactico policy. And they purchased the best players in the world. And they thought, if we stack our team with the best players in the world, we'll make a super team. If they knew a thing or two about super chickens, they would realize it's not going to go so well. And often those players didn't play well together and were sold on the next season. Barcelona had a very different policy. They train people up from inside the group and they make sure that everybody recognizes, yes, you're a great star player, but you also depend upon the whole team. And they had a very different result. At the level of companies, Microsoft is a company that's often praised in industry for really nurturing collaborative behavior between people working in different teams and within teams. And that's often said within industry analysis of one of the reasons why that's been a successful company. But of course, when people set up employee-owned companies or cooperatives or commons-based enterprises or social enterprises, these design traits are key for bringing in and saying, how are we as an employee-owned company really going to make good decisions that keep us all thinking this is a great place to work? At the level of nations, it's extremely dominant in the world, the geopolitics. When nations as a group, so here, Russia, Ukraine, but many nations, right? How is that nation behaving? Is it a collaborative nation or actually will the nation descend into conflict internally? And it's been fascinating to see some of the internal conflicts rising up with a near mutiny in Russia. And one thing people often say about Ukrainians is that the sheer determination as a nation of Ukrainians with so much less power and wealth, but the determination to hold the land. Is there something happening within those countries that's pushing one into one direction and the other? At the level of between nations, the G77 and the G20 have got here, right? Which of those groupings of nations, will they be able to be a collaborative, altruistic group really working well together, or do they descend into being super chickens and not be an effective group of nations? And then when we come to the world, we're just one group. We're not competing against another group. There is no other planet or no aliens that we know of that we're competing against. We have to be a collaborative group together. And we haven't yet figured out how to do that. As we see in the climate change negotiations, we are not yet a collaborative group moving towards a shared understanding of a goal, making progress on that. So let's come back. We're moving from rational economic man, that self-interested trait, to our pro-social characteristics. And I just invite you to reflect as you engage in this day, in everything that you're doing today, but taking away these ideas from Elinor Ostrom into all the work you do. How can we create principles for how we work together as a group so that it brings out the collaborative side of each of us and invites us to leave that little piece of super chicken that we all have inside of us, just leave it at home, because it's not going to be an effective way of being here. So I'll end there, and I really hope that you have wonderful days and warm your eggs through the day, a wonderful flock of chickens. It's been fantastic to join you. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a fantastic day of collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you so much, Kate. It was incredible, a very good start of the day. If you will be in the room, you will get dried mushrooms. I might ship it to you maybe, or I don't know how sustainable that is, but yeah, okay. I give one to Rob, thank you very much. And I give two to Rob.
Let's see if I'm a super chicken about it or not.
I will monitor your behavior, and there will be graduated sanctions.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye, thank you.
Vi kommer